I understand Americans are anxious, and they're anxious for good reason. I was raised in a household when the price of gasoline rose precipitously. It was the discussion at the table. It made a difference when food prices went up. But we've never seen anything like Putin's tax on both food and gas.
That was President Biden speaking at the Port of Los Angeles a little over an hour ago. Now, Biden making it clear that fighting inflation is the administration's top economic priority. Joining us now is Mario Cordero. He's executive director of the Port of Long Branch, just across the harbor from where President Biden was speaking earlier today. Mario, it's great to have you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Shauna, for the kind invitation.
So you were with President Biden earlier today. Now, he did go on to say that there has been significant improvement in resolving some of the supply chain issues that we were seeing at the ports. But give us a sense of where things stand today.
Well, for the Port of Long Beach, as you know, with the Port of Los Angeles, this is the nation's largest port complex. So we're in a better situation than we were last fall. And as an example, if you go back to the date of November 1st, we were dealing with a capacity constraint issue, which bottom line led to containers that were at the terminals for longer than 9 days, a significant percentage that was up. We've been able to reduce that by as much as almost 60%, and we're raving in that 50 to 60 percentile. So it's been much improvement in creating and addressing the capacity constraints. And also with regard to the vessels that have been off the coast. Today we have about 29 vessels backed up off the coast waiting to get into the port complex. In January, we had over 100. So obviously there's been some significant progress in that regard.
And how long do you expect until we do see things return back to normal, to pre-pandemic levels?
Well, let me just say, first of all, COVID-19 is the root of the cause of what happened in the global supply chain. And it still continues in this uncertain path. Given that, however, here in the United States, things have progressed in a very positive trend in terms of more people being vaccinated, thanks to the administration's leadership. But on the other hand, again, I think there's still some uncertainty. So the healthy consumer demand is a good news. We have a very good, stable economy. So that consumer demand is going to continue. And in terms of the supply constraints, I think you'll see that dissipating. So as we move towards the end of the year. So I'm looking forward to better days ahead.
One thing that would certainly not help is a potential strike. 22,000 dock workers still need a new contract. Can you give us an update there as to labor talks? How have they progressed?
Well, as you may know, I'm not privy to the conversations, negotiations. I'm not in the room. But I will say I'm very optimistic that you're not going to see a strike here in the Southern California complex, nor are you going to see a labor slowdown. I think the two parties, the Pacific Maritime Association and LOW, I think they're having very substantive and constructive discussions. And I do think that they'll reach a resolution of their differences within a reasonable time. So I don't see any worse scenarios here at this port complex whatsoever.
Mario, one of the major points of this dispute is over automation. That's the dividing line in these talks. When we compare the U.S. ports to what we're seeing overseas in Europe or in China, they rely much more heavily on automation than we do here in the U.S. Where do you stand on that? And I guess, where do you see the role of automation going in the ports here in the U.S.?
Well, the focus for us is productivity, cargo velocity, as opposed to cargo volatility that we've been talking about here in the supply chain for the last 2 years. So on that question, I think this is why the Port of Long Beach came out first on the 24/7 vision back when we had one of our terminals, Pier T, come forward with a pilot project. Los Angeles had one come into play earlier this year. So I think extending the hours of operation and having a 24/7 framework as we go forward, that's going to produce a lot of cargo velocity and more fluidity. So I think the focus here in terms of how we move the container through the supply chain, that is from ship to shore, out of the terminal and through the supply chain. So this 24/7 concept has to work with the entire supply chain. It's not just a terminal extending hours. So I think for me, that's the quest right now, that again, when you look at the world's top performance ports, you will find a common denominator. They're 24/7. That is, those cranes go day in and day out, day in and night out. So I think at some point that concept has to move here in a more positive direction.
And Mario, speaking of ways to sort of really upgrade and innovate in the port space, what are you keeping an eye on? Where do we go from here, given the lessons that we've learned from COVID and what we saw with the huge backup of containers and also obviously these much larger cargo ships also coming into waters?
Well, where we go from here is lessons learned. We have to address the supply chain issues that the president has focused on. And again, this involves not only just extended hours, we need to have adequate equipment, chassis, rail cars, and again, more fluidity in the supply chain. So I think where we go from here, also very important, is digital transformation, data sharing, uplifting technology here at our nation ports and in the supply chain. So I think, again, I will end by saying, we have a very significant crisis that we've experienced here in the world with the global pandemic, but crisis does bring opportunities. And the opportunity that we have here right now is we've elevated some of the issues that the Federal Maritime Commission talked about back in 2015. Those issues have been elevated now to substantive, constructive conversations on what we need to do to have a resilient supply chain moving forward.
Mario Cordero, Executive Director of the Port of Long Beach. Apologies. I think I said Long Branch, which is Long Branch, New Jersey, my home state, in the intro. So apologies for that. But Mario, thanks so much for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you so much. And again, thanks for the kind invitation.